Thank you for inviting me here to beautiful Palm Beach County. It is truly an honor to be joining you here this weekend and today. Last week, as some of you know, I was in Selma, Alabama for the 61st anniversary of what has become known as Bloody Sunday. And I marched across the same bridge where 61 years ago, a very young John Lewis and other peaceful protesters, they were brutally beaten for simply demanding voting rights. And last year, I was in Rochester, New York, and I had the opportunity to tour the home of Susan B. Anthony, and then to pay a visit to the gravesite of Frederick Douglass. Of course, both were abolitionists and suffragists. Now, for me, these moments were poignant reminders that the fight for equality, the work to secure voting rights, the quest for democracy for all has been long and hard fought. And that fight, it continues. It continues. So today, I'd like to talk to you about the current threats to our democracy and how the League is meeting this moment. But I'll also talk to you about the essential role of women in pro-democracy movements, as well as how nonpartisanship can help address the political polarization that we're experiencing in this nation. And finally, I'll share with you the impact that the League continues to have in empowering voters. You know, about 250 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, asserting the principles of equality, liberty, and the consent of the governed, and almost 238 years after the ratification of the U.S. Constitution, establishing the framework of our then new democracy, now, in the 21st century, our nation faces existential threats to democracy. Now, many of you know these threats are not new. In fact, political analysts suggest that democracy in the United States has been declining for quite a number of years. In fact, the magazine, The Economist, they have a research analysis unit, and they analyze 167 countries. And for several years, it has rated the U.S. as a flawed democracy rather than a full democracy. But since that last rating, just a few months ago, over 500 political scientists were surveyed, and the overwhelming majority believe that the U.S. is now sliding towards some form of authoritarianism. Now, Harvard professor of government Stephen Levitsky, he says we're already there. We're already there. Levitsky, by the way, is the co-author of How Democracies Die. You may be familiar with his book. Now, the League of Women Voters, we've been working to advance democracy for over a century. So this is not the first time that we have faced these kinds of challenges. Over 70 years ago, our National League president, her name was Percy Maxim Lee, she testified before Congress, speaking out against Senator Joseph McCarthy's abuse of powers. She said, and I quote, "I believe tolerance and respect for the opinions of others is being jeopardized by men and women whose instincts are worthily patriotic, but whose minds are apparently unwilling to accept the necessity for dissent within a democracy." So Percy Maxim Lee reminded the nation 70 years ago that dissent, participation, debate are core to democracy. They're not threats to our democracy, right? They're not threats. During the McCarthy era, the League courageously spoke out. So I have hope. I have hope because we are committed to acting with that same boldness today. Right? And in fact, for the first time in our 106-year history, last April, the League of Women Voters declared that our nation is in a constitutional crisis. And I'd like to share a little more background on why we believe the U.S. is, in fact, in a constitutional crisis. Now, we define at the League a constitutional crisis is when, and I'm going to read most of our definition, through failure or a strong risk of failure, the executive, the legislative, or judiciary branches cannot or will not adequately protect the U.S. Constitution, or explicit attempts to dismantle a functioning democracy occur within at least one of the three branches of government through laws or actions that undermine the U.S. Constitution, or where any level of federal government takes action to destroy democratic institutions in a manner that the intent and purpose of the U.S. Constitution is in jeopardy. Now, we believe there is no question that we are in a constitutional crisis. The executive branch, well, it's regularly overreaching beyond its constitutional authority. We see that on an almost daily basis. We've seen attacks intended to weaken our judicial branch. And Congress, I could talk about Congress for an hour, but I'll just say this. Congress is failing to exercise or even protect its own constitutional powers. In sum, this constitutional crisis involves all three branches of our government, all three branches. Now, declaring a constitutional crisis demands that we also take action. So we launched our Unite and Rise 8.5 initiative. Now, Unite and Rise 8.5 is our effort to mobilize millions of people through advocacy, civic education, and public engagement. Now, coincidentally, the same day that we publicly declared a constitutional crisis, conservative columnist David Brooks published an op-ed in the New York Times that same day. And he wrote, and I quote, "It's time for a comprehensive national civic uprising. Peoples throughout history have done exactly this when confronted by an authoritarian assault," unquote. Now, I want to remind you all that historically, authoritarianism can emerge from the extreme right or from the extreme left. Now, Brooks explained that in the short term, we must defend the current efforts at authoritarianism. But he suggests that in the long term vision must be of a more just society that doesn't just attack the current president, but an approach that addresses the causes of the rise of authoritarianism. Now, we believe that the League's Unite and Rise 8.5 campaign is an essential part of that kind of national civic uprising. Now, by the way, the 8.5 of Unite and Rise refers to the 8.5 million people that we intend to mobilize. And 8.5 million equates to approximately 3.5% of the voting eligible population. So why are we focusing on that 3.5%? Harvard political scientist Dr. Erica Chenoweth has analyzed hundreds and hundreds, it's probably close to or over 1,000 20th century violent revolutions and nonviolent campaigns worldwide. Chenoweth's research is interesting. Their research revealed that to achieve sweeping change in a nation or to prevent an authoritarian takeover requires only 3.5% of the population engaging in nonviolent, collective, grassroots action. So that's why we're focused on activating those 8.5 million voters who have not really been mobilized. Now, some might assume that a national civic uprising means protesting in the streets. And we do need people to show up at demonstrations, to clearly convey disapproval in large, visible numbers. But I have to tell you, public protests alone will not bring about the change that we want. In fact, Dr. Chenoweth's research also found that civil resistance campaigns do not usually succeed when they rely primarily on public protest. Rather, movements that shift among tactics are far more likely to be successful. So we need to mobilize people to contact their elected officials, not just once, but repeatedly, over and over again, to call out mis- and disinformation, to show up at town halls and government meetings, and to speak out at those meetings, and most importantly, to get out and vote in every election. And I want you all to know, while there's a lot to do to preserve, to restore, and advance democracy, if you are doing something, you're making a difference. You're making a difference. And I would suggest to you that that includes being here today. Being here today matters in the fight for our democracy. So thank you all for turning out to support the League here today. Now, those of you Leaguers who know me know that I fervently believe that the League's greatest strength is our grassroots power. And that's all of you. That's all of you. That's where the League's power sits. Now, while most of you here are women, I want to acknowledge for a moment those of you who are not women. It is critically important that we have allies in this work. So I deeply appreciate that you have chosen to work with and support the League of Women Voters. I don't want to overlook your contributions here. But I will also say that you chose the right kind of organization for this work, because women are at the forefront in the defense of democracy. And here's what the research tells us. You notice I cite a lot of research. That's the old professor in me, so you get a little bit of a lecture. So here's what the research tells us about women in the fight for democracy. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace published a report which noted that globally, women have historically been at the forefront in pro-democracy movements. And the report concludes more specifically that women are driving pro-democratic mobilization as grassroots activists in the United States right now. Now, Chenoweth's research, which I mentioned a moment ago, also revealed, this is the research, it's not aspirational, this is what the research told us. It is vital to have women involved, including in leadership roles, for any civil resistance campaign to be successful. And in fact, if you look around the nation, women are leading the charge. So I have reason to be hopeful for the future of democracy. But, we all know that part of the challenge we face is this seemingly deep polarization within our nation. Many have suggested that this country is more divided now than at any time since the Civil War, or so it seems. Dr. Dianna Wynn, a political scientist at Syracuse University, studies these political divisions. And Dunaway found that the escalation of polarization in recent decades is largely driven by misconceptions of partisan voters on the other side. Now, when I say partisan voters on the other side, those are people who align with a party different than the one that you personally align with. But she notes that the political leaders that get the most attention are often the most extreme within a party, right or left. And then people tend to assume that ordinary partisan voters share those same views as those more extreme leaders. But Dunaway's research suggests we're not as far apart as we may think. Most Americans still fall closer to the center on political issues. Nevertheless, perceptions of polarization persist, and as a result, we denigrate one another. We denigrate one another. A Pew Research study surveyed both Democrats and Republicans. And the survey asked about their perceptions of those in the opposite party. And I have to tell you, when I read the research, I found it extraordinarily disheartening. The study found that a majority of those in both major parties viewed people aligning with the other party as immoral, dishonest, unintelligent, and closed-minded. I have to tell you, realistically, it is unlikely that those characteristics are actually true of a majority of voters in both major parties. Now, my professional background, as you heard earlier, is in human communication. I have devoted most of my career to teaching, training, writing about, and advising on communication skills and strategies. And I can tell you that the most important communication skill is listening. It's listening, especially when we disagree. And a key strategy for resolving conflict is to seek common ground. And it may not feel like it, but most Americans, we have common ground. We may disagree on particular policies and the specifics, but we have common ground in terms of many objectives and certainly our values. We must stop villainizing everyone with whom we disagree. They are our neighbors. They are our colleagues, and I don't know about you, but in many cases, they are my friends and they are my family. We need to recognize and appreciate that reasonable differences in political viewpoints are a sign of a healthy democracy. It's a healthy democracy when we see that, which is why I believe that the League's nonpartisan voice is needed now more than ever. Now, for the Leaguers in the room, you know that being nonpartisan largely means that the League does not endorse or oppose a candidate that's running for elected office, and we don't endorse or oppose any political parties. But nonpartisanship does not mean that we're not political. We are a political organization, and in fact, the League is not neutral on many important issues. And I want to be really clear about what I'm about to say. Despite what political parties may have you believe, issues are not inherently partisan. They're not inherently partisan. Now, we've all watched political parties and politicians shift their positions over time, right? because they genuinely had a change of heart, or in some cases, it better suits their political ambitions in the moment. But the League holds its positions because of our principles, regardless of whether or not either political party supports us. And our positions are relatively stable, having been established many decades ago. We rarely shift our position on an issue. The League is an expert on nonpartisanship with over a century of pro-democracy work. For over 106 years, nonpartisanship has been our guiding principle. And the American public has trust in the League because we are not beholden to any political party and certainly not to any politician. But I do understand in these times, questions about our nonpartisanship are not unexpected when we have so much divisiveness. But I will say that often those who question our nonpartisanship, they just misunderstand who we are. They misunderstand who we are. Or in some cases, they intentionally malign the League in an effort to silence us. So I'm going to be really clear. The League will not be silent. Because such unwarranted attacks will not distract us from our work. Calling out attacks on democracy, that is not partisan. It's not partisan. And our nonpartisan approach, it gets results. Millions of voters rely on our trusted, nonpartisan information, including information on tens of thousands of candidates running in elections across the country, including here in your community, right? People turn to the League of Women Voters for information about their candidates. And many of you don't know this. The League of Women Voters continues to be the largest nonpartisan, volunteer-driven registrant of voters in the entire United States. But you know, when attempts are made to restrict access to the ballot, we meet those threats where it often matters the most, in the courts. In the courts. Every case, every ruling, every injunction protects the voices of millions of voters. And then beyond that, the League is also helping channel the public frustration we're seeing into people-powered participation. Our grassroots members and supporters, like all of you, are taking action at an unprecedented scale. You're responding to action alerts. You're showing up at town halls and government meetings. You're joining peaceful demonstrations. And you're standing shoulder to shoulder with millions of people who are committed to democracy. And just last year, national, state, and local leagues, they published 140 letters to the editor and op-eds in media outlets across the country. That was just in 1 year, and there aren't many organizations that can accomplish that. The League is uniquely positioned because we are in communities across the country. But I have to tell you that behind all of this work are countless League volunteers dedicating their time, their energy, and their passion to power this work. And all of this is a reminder that none of us are doing this work alone. You're not doing it alone. Because when you join the League of Women Voters, you join a nationwide alliance of activists. It's an alliance of activists. So during these times of political strife, there are reasons to be hopeful. Our membership is growing. Our community of activists is getting stronger. Younger people are joining our organization in increasing numbers. More partners are reaching out to collaborate with us. And more Americans are turning to the League of Women Voters as a trusted source of nonpartisan information. I was recently asked what my elevator speech defining democracy was. And I was caught a little off guard. I had a lot of elevator speeches for my profession, but I didn't think about defining democracy. And I gave my answer, and then I had time to think about it afterwards. Like, was that a good answer or not? Because I must confess that I had nothing uniquely profound to say. So I still hold to the answer that I gave when asked. I believe the best explanation of democracy is embodied in the words of Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And as you all know, he said that democracy is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And in this moment in our nation's history, the League's mission, our voice, and our grassroots power are needed now more than ever. So it's our job, all of us, to ensure that we do have a government that truly is of the people, by the people, and for the people. I want to thank you all for having me here today. It has been a pleasure and an honor.
Now, if anybody has any questions, raise your hand and I'll be by with the microphone to get your question. And there's somebody right next to me.
Hi there. My question is, I'm asking for a status report on League of Women Voters lawsuits to protect our democracy.
So I'm not going to give you any detailed status report. I can't tell you exactly how many lawsuits we are engaged in, but at any given time, 50 or so. In big election years, it's around 70 in a year. So I know that when people think about the League of Women Voters, they think of us often out registering voters. And they don't often see the work that we do advocating on issues. And we're very much a voting rights organization, and we advocate on other pro-democracy and quality community issues. But we are litigating all the time. So we are a plaintiff, or we have filed amicus briefs in approximately 50 cases at any given time. You'll recall that early in this administration, the president put out an executive order that essentially, it was unconstitutional because he may put out another one, dictating how the states must run their elections, things regarding documentary proof. We won that. We won that lawsuit. And even before we won the lawsuit, we got an effective emergency injunction. We have lawsuits going on around the country to prevent the federal government from taking your voting information and associated information from the boards of elections and secretaries of state. So involved in a lot of those lawsuits state by state. And I can't speak to your Florida lawsuits because you have people in the room that would have more information on that, and I don't speak on some ongoing matters. You know, the last time we looked, and don't quote me on the statistic because it can change. We have about an 80% win rate in the lawsuits that we're involved in. Our win rate is about 80%. So, when we talk about litigation, I have long believed that litigation is an important advocacy strategy if you can't get the change you need or the protections otherwise. So it's really important for the league to continue to be in the courts. And of course, as we gear up for every election, we're prepared to file lawsuits as necessary leading up to that election and then following elections. As you all know, the league is very present in their communities and their states, monitoring those issues and letting us know when they think we need to file lawsuits.
Next question, raise your hand.
Okay, thank you. Hi, this might not be like a huge question, but I'm curious to what you think the best way to get more people registered to vote is, like in your experience. How do you get maybe the younger generation involved or people who feel like they don't have a voice get involved?
Sure. I want to tack on to my last answer. If you want to learn about the status of our lawsuits, if you go to our website, LWV.org, in one of the tabs that you can click on, one of them has our legal center, where it is a summary of every league lawsuit that we're involved in, and it will give you a status update on any of those. So that's a common question. How do we get people to register to vote, especially young people? Now, if someone had the perfect answer, we wouldn't even be talking about that, right? But it is a challenge, and I spent most of my professional career with young people in college classrooms. So I have found that the most persuasive messages are showing them the information on how powerful they really are collectively. That if younger people voted en masse, collectively, they could change the entire course of this nation, right? They could be on city councils and school boards. A lot of those races are very tight. So when they don't see themselves represented, it really is about mobilizing their generation. I'm also going to tell you, I am not the best messenger of that message. And the research will tell you this too. I'm 63 years old. So talking to an 18, 19-year-old about why he or she would vote, I think I can be pretty persuasive because I've worked with that population a lot, but the most persuasive person will be one of their peers. It will be one of their peers, which is why it's important that the league involve young people within our organization. That's how we help mobilize those younger generations. So no easy answer. It's about increasing the representation of young people in the league and other pro-democracy organizations, and then meeting young people where they are. I will say, once you get someone registered to vote, there is this element where they're more likely to vote. I mean, you can't vote if you're not registered, but the act of registering, they're more likely to vote. And if you can get them to vote in their first election, then they're far more likely to make this a regular habit within their life. So the challenge is, I think it's not just registering to vote. I think the focus really needs to be on voter turnout. We have got a lot of people registered to vote, but a lot of people are sitting out elections, even though they're eligible to go to those polls.
Next question, hopefully from this side of the room.
Sorry, I'm looking around. The lights are in my eyes, so I assume you can see me, but I can't always see you.
Hi, I assume I know the answer, but what is the league's position on the SAVE Act? It seems like there's a lot of information on both sides.
Okay.
With a lot of misinformation.
Yeah, so the SAVE Act has passed the House, and so now it's going to depend on what happens in the Senate. The SAVE Act if it passes, would require documentary proof of citizenship in order to register to vote. Now, it purports to address voter fraud. We don't have voter fraud. It is exceedingly rare, right? So it's really, what is the objective? It's a voter suppression bill. And we see a lot of that happening at the state level and legislatures and certainly the national level. Under the guise of protecting elections, what they're really trying to do is suppress the vote. Well, this documentation would require a photo ID and a document that would show where you were born or your proof of citizenship. Now, I want you to think about this. I don't know about the state of Florida, but there are very few states where on your driver's license, which is what most people use for their photo ID, it doesn't say where you were born. So you need some other documentation, typically a birth certificate. About 70 million women in this country changed their name when they got married, so now their birth certificate doesn't match their photo ID, and the SAVE Act requires that that information match, requires it to match. On top of that, people of color are 3 times more likely not to have the required documentation available. So it is a disenfranchisement, I believe, of people of color and of women to keep us from the ballot box. And if you think it's unintentional, I will just say it was introduced in the last session of Congress, and we were out railing against it, how it would disenfranchise people, in particular women, so they knew, and they didn't change that portion of the legislation. There was no correction. So Congress knows exactly what they want to achieve with that piece of legislation. So what is the League doing? We have been a leader in fighting back against the SAVE Act. It is critically important that we prevent this from passing. We put out action alerts, and people are responding. If you have not contacted your senator, make sure you do. Even if you think you already know how your senator is going to vote, they need to hear from you in large numbers that they need to vote against the SAVE Act or any legislation that is similar in that form. And if that doesn't pass, there'll be something else introduced, and we'll watch for that, and we will, because they're not going to let up. They're not going to let up. So we can't let up either, but we must defeat the SAVE Act.
Is there another question?
How strong is the League of Women's Voters with the Hispanic community across the country? Right here in Palm Beach County, we represent 28%, but I don't hear much about Hispanics with the League of Women's Voters.
So it depends on the community. We're so grassroots. Some local leagues have a very strong representation within the league and very strong alliances. Here's what I can tell you from a national perspective. So on the inside of the league, strong representation on our board. We also have a strong partnership with organizations like LULAC. We're partnering on lawsuits and other mobilizations. And then again, it depends on the state and on the community. I often point to the league in Houston that just has done a great job of making sure that their league and their volunteers are really representative of the community, making sure that their voter information is put out, actually not just in English and Spanish, but in multiple languages that represent the nature of that community. So it just depends. What I can tell you is at a national level, we have these really strong partnerships and coalitions. I'll also tell you that, you know, in the past, we normally didn't speak up on immigration issues, not because we don't have clear positions. We have very clear positions that we need sensible sensible policy around immigration, and that includes humane treatment and a path to citizenship. And so we lean on other organizations who have really a stronger presence, and that is their focus. So I would say we are very careful about knowing when to lead on an issue and knowing when to be a really good ally on an issue. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, but we've got our election, we have our convention, our national convention coming up in June. And we will be asking the members to put a priority on immigration issues, among other issues. So you are likely to see a shift slightly in some of the issues that we prioritize compared to what we've done in the past, and it really speaks to the times.
One of the reasons that I really like to work the microphone at events like this is that I get to ask the last question before we move on to the next part of the meeting. And for the last question, there is a phrase that I have begun to hear that I never thought I would hear in America. And that phrase is, well, at the next election, if there is a next election.
Okay, all right.
How do you respond to that sort of concern?
Okay, I understand the concern because of the rhetoric that has been coming out of this administration around elections and some threats, both implicit and explicit, and other actions that this administration has been taking that are unconstitutional, right? We know that. And efforts to take over elections that they have no business being involved in. What I will tell you is there will be elections because the League of Women Voters and other pro-democracy organizations are here. There will be elections. If the people, if the voters demand it, they cannot get away with not having elections. So I am far more concerned about tactics that deter people from showing up to the polls, right? So it's not enough to have an election. We must have free and fair elections where people are not afraid to go to the polls. And the League of Women Voters is here to make sure that that happens. A lot of that work happens at the state level with your state level league and very often at the local level. And I'm going to give you examples of how that happens. You know, we go to court to fight against things like executive orders that are unconstitutional. But a couple of elections ago, we went to court in Arizona because they have drop boxes throughout their state where you can, which I think is brilliant, where you can go drop off your absentee or mail-in ballot or on election day. Armed people were showing up and just sitting around those ballot boxes with their license plates obscured and in masks. And people were being intimidated. And brown people in Arizona in particular were being intimidated and deterred from voting. We filed a lawsuit, as did other organizations, and we got an emergency injunction. There's been a settlement. I'll just say that we're happy with that settlement. Of all the organizations that filed a lawsuit in that case, the League was the only one that won that lawsuit. We won that lawsuit. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that question. I know we're out of time. You all have been lovely. Thank you again for having me here.